Hello, my name is Harry Kohlmann. I'm the founder and CEO of Park Street, and I want to talk with you briefly about what is on everybody's mind today, which is the coronavirus and the spread everywhere that has interrupted everybody's lives and also everybody's business. We have, over the last couple of days or couple of weeks, we've received tons of inquiries from our supplier partners and our clients with regards to what they should be thinking about and what they want to do or what they should do in order to mitigate the risks involved in this, or as a consequence of this spread. Well, when you really think about this virus situation, I think some people call it like a black swan, some people call it was inevitable, people should have thought about it, that it would be happening. Whatever it is, it's basically a very high, or a situation that has a high degree of volatility and unpredictability. So thinking about this from a perspective of managing under the highest level of uncertainty. So if you thought, or if you asked somebody 2 weeks ago, looking at the picture here of New York City, of the subway 2 weeks ago, where there was word about the virus spreading all the way out there, but people were not changing their lives and everything looked like normal. The subways were full, businesses were full, restaurants were full, etc. And you compare it to today, where there's mandatory orders, that restaurants and bars have to be closed, and life is very different. People are asked to work remotely, people are not going out anymore, and people are practicing social distancing. And there's a lot of consequences for a lot of different businesses that come with that. Now, that was 2 weeks ago to today. What do we know what's going to happen in 2 weeks? We don't know. And things could get better, hopefully, but things might get worse also. So what we've been discussing with a bunch of our clients and supplier partners was what type of strategies, if any, could be taken in order to mitigate risk moving forward. So when you look at the supply chain for alcoholic beverages, so you probably would think about the upstream production first, and depending on how the individual supply chain is generated, some people might be completely vertically integrated, some are relying on supplier partners that provide raw materials, bottles, labels, and other ingredients or materials to make the product. So that product, or these products, or these ingredients would have to be shipped typically to the production facility. So either the distillery, the winery, or the brewery. And like the product has to be made, it might have to be shipped from there to a bottling facility too. So if the bottling facility is not at the same place where the production facility is, then if a centralized warehouse location is being utilized for the supply chain, basically the product has to be shipped to a centralized distribution warehouse. Then from that warehouse, it has to be sent to a customer, assuming again a utilization of traditional supply chain with third-party distributors or control state authorities, to then hit either the warehouse of the distributor or the payment warehouse in a control state. And then from that facility, the product has to then be shipped to a retailer, to either an on or off-premise retailer, for them to be shipped either to the consumer or being picked up by the consumer. So if that is a generic supply chain, so at every one of these steps, there's risk. There's risk of movement between the different steps, and there's risk at every one of these facilities or every one of these steps in between. And there are different strategies to mitigate that. Well, in a normal environment, everybody would try to optimize supply chain costs. Terms like just-in-time production, lower working capital, just working with low stocks. All of that stuff leads to better margins. And margin expansion or margin optimization is the word in a normal environment. In a crisis environment, the focus on margin might not be that relevant. In a time when people are paying $100 for hand sanitizer, margin or the margin views or profitability views are out of the window anyhow. So things like to consider at that time is, would it make sense to shift from one supplier to multiple suppliers? Even though the prices that could be negotiated with these different suppliers might be higher because you don't bundle the volume. Could you work with higher inventory levels? Generally working with higher stocks everywhere. And working with multiple distribution channels, etc. So we're going to examine each one of these steps individually, because what is really at stake here is what happens if the impact of the virus will be felt somewhere along the line or somewhere along that supply chain. How do you get around it, above it, somehow underneath it, somehow get the product past the blockage on that supply chain? So when we look at risk mitigation examples of the upstream production would be, again, like, the bottles or ingredients, labels, etc. So one of the strategies is to just buy larger quantities in exchange for longer payment terms. That is a principle that actually works everywhere, on every step in that supply chain. So asking to say, okay, well, I'm happy to buy many more bottles to store at my facility, but I would like to have longer payment terms because I might not have that working capital at hand right now, but I would like to secure an ongoing production. Another strategy to consider, a risk mitigation strategy, would be to qualify geographically diversified backup suppliers. So if you're working just with one supplier of bottles that produces in China, could it make sense to also qualify a producer that produces domestically? Maybe for higher cost, but basically as a backup supplier. Exploration of make versus buy. Would it make sense to print your own labels instead of having the labels shipped from somebody who might produce better quality labels, cheaper labels, but might not be able to get the labels to you because they're affected? Another strategy to explore is the possible product changes. So if you cannot get your traditional bottle and you're running out, could it be that you qualify or create a bottle that is more like a crisis bottle edition? In the current times, consumers are very forgiving and applaud creative solutions to the common problem. So these are just some examples on the upstream production side that could be considered. How about at the production side or the bottling facility itself? And that assumes that bottling and production take place at the same location. Is there a chance, or do you have a chance to utilize multiple facilities? For larger companies, they do have, they own maybe different distilleries or different wineries. Could it be that the different production facilities are being equipped to help each other out in case if one of the facilities is going to get hit with an outbreak? Somebody should consider qualifying backup contract production options. Could some larger facility be utilized to produce or to bottle the product in case if the own production facility has to be shut down? What could be done at the facility itself? Like things that are being recommended by the CDC right now for everybody. Testing workers for symptoms before entering the facility to avoid the spread at the facility. If somebody has a fever, let them go home. Well, that is not a job necessarily that could be, talk about the production line, a job that can be done remotely, but it's probably better if the person stays home, if the person is sick, in order not to affect others. Social distancing at the facility to, like stagger the breaks, to give people enough space, to recommend them wearing gloves, masks, etc. From a power supply perspective, this is not a thing that anybody is worrying about right now, but what happens if the power supply might get interrupted based on a virus outbreak at a utility? So working on power supply backup options, power generators, fuel storage, and then from an equipment perspective, to have spare parts or backup equipment in case of the equipment breaks. The supply chains for some of these might get interrupted, and be prepared could pay off nicely. Talking about the next step, the generic next step, the distribution warehouse. So what happens if the distribution warehouse is going to get hit? So one of the mitigation strategies would be to qualify only professional warehouses with appropriate risk management in place. So there's tons of warehouses out there, and some of them are cheaper than others. Now, in today's environment, it might pay off to have a warehouse that is more professional. It basically measures also the temperature of workers prior to the work start. Use basic cleaning materials for incoming goods. Practices social distancing, etc. Not every warehouse can do these, but having alternatives matters. Another item is to qualify more automated warehouses compared to more manual warehouses. Automation generally might work better if the warehouse can pick automatically, for example. If that works, that warehouse is probably less at risk for being shut down, either by a regulatory body or just by an outbreak based on management's decision. Another strategy to consider would be to spread the stock among multiple warehouses in different geographies, to not have everything in one place. Then one other alternative that a lot of our clients have utilized is basically to skip the warehouse and try to ship straight to the customer. Utilize direct imports to provide discounts for avoiding the warehouse step. And then in the next step, it's also to encourage customers like distributors to buy more than what they need. To say, look, we never know what type of steps in the supply chain will get interrupted. Why don't you buy more? You might only work on 30-day supply. Now might be the time to go to 90-day supply. And in exchange for that, you might want to provide longer payment term options in order to encourage the customers to do that. Because obviously, like everybody else, customers are also working on their optimizing their working capital, etc. So it's not a given that they would be willing to buy much more than what they need to. With regards to downstream now on the distributor and control state side, it's very challenging to come up with risk mitigation strategies, just given or due to the regulatory framework. In some states, it's feasible to qualify multiple distributors. So if one distributor with their warehouse might get affected, you would have another distributor at your hands. But in the majority of states, that's not an option. So if the distributor is getting shut down, that is typically a shutdown until it can get opened up again. And so far, we haven't heard of any of these, except in, for example, the PLCB in the control state in Pennsylvania. They shut down all liquor stores. So their operation is shut. So the whole state is basically going dry. And there's unfortunately no real way around it. Now, for those of you that might have production facilities in the state that is affected, like the distillery in Pennsylvania, you might want to explore ways to possibly utilize that, even though we've heard from some of our clients that are in these situations that the states are typically also limiting these type of options to utilize the production facilities there for maybe pickup, etc. So that is a tougher situation to mitigate. But again, every step should be analyzed for possible mitigation strategies. And then last but not least, on the retailer side, for those who are very focused on the off-premise channel, they probably experienced times over the last couple of weeks that felt more like the holidays, like an OND type of demand in off-premise stores that is a result of consumers being scared, consumers stocking up, but also people needing to work from home and not being able to go to restaurants or bars. So a lot of that extra volume goes to off-premise retailers. So if your business is focused mainly on restaurants and bars, to qualify some off-premise retailers is mandatory in order to make sure that the product can get to the consumers. Another important strategy to consider would be to qualify e-commerce retailers that provide in-state delivery options. Somebody who can go in and say, well, look, I always drink my drink at restaurant X, but that restaurant is closed. Could you guide them through your website to a purchase option at a Total Wine or a Drizzly or somewhere where somebody could go purchase a product and can get it delivered safely to their home. So this is just like an overview of several risk mitigation strategies that should be considered So again, every single step in your individual supply chain should be analyzed for backup options that are feasible. The expected impact of that virus, especially with all these restrictions right now, is expected to be short. A lot of these strategies might require longer timelines. But again, I think the balancing of what the additional costs are with regards to what the rewards are, what the reduced risk is moving forward should be balanced, and a strategy should be developed based on these principles.